You built the portfolio, Matthew. That does not mean you get to keep it. Charles Vance pushed a white envelope across the glass conference table, then leaned back like he had just finished a routine budget review. Effective immediately. Every account reports to me. Your employment ends today. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My name is Matthew Sinclair. I was 47 years old, Senior Portfolio Operations Director at Ironwood Managed Solutions, and the man responsible for a $120 million client portfolio spread across warehouses, retail networks, payment systems, and supplier platforms. And Charles had chosen the afternoon before our most dangerous migration to fire me. If you have ever watched a company remove the one person keeping disaster away, you already know what happened next. Sarah Jenkins from Human Resources sat beside him with an open folder, refusing to look in my direction. Charles tapped the envelope. The company is simplifying leadership. Your management style has become too controlling, and frankly, we no longer need someone at your salary level. Then he smiled toward the door. His son, Justin Vance, walked in. Justin had been at Ironwood for 14 months. He had never led a live migration. He had never handled a major client outage. Yet, he was wearing the confident expression of someone who had already been promised my office. Justin will oversee the portfolio. Charles said he has reviewed the transition materials. I kept my voice even. Has tonight's migration been postponed? Charles gave a short laugh. No, the final dependency map has not been approved. 3 legacy systems still require manual certificate renewal. The backup routing layer must stay active until validation is complete. Justin folded his arms. We have automation for that now. I looked at him. Automation cannot renew certificates on systems that reject the new authentication chain. Charles's smile disappeared. This is exactly what I mean. He said you keep creating reasons why nobody can function without you. That sentence cost them more than he understood. I asked Sarah to confirm the time of termination. She glanced at the wall clock. Your access will end at 2:40 in the afternoon, and you no longer have authority over tonight's migration. Charles answered before she could. Correct, you are done. I nodded once. Please include that in writing. He expected tears, maybe an argument. Maybe he thought I would beg him to reconsider after 15 years of loyalty. Instead, I signed the receipt for my termination letter without a single word of protest. My laptop disconnected before I reached my desk. My access badge flashed red when I tried to enter the server room one last time to retrieve my personal coffee cup. A security officer waited beside my office while 23 people on my team watched me place a framed photograph of my daughter, 2 notebooks, and a coffee mug into a cardboard box. No one spoke. The silence in the open plan office was deafening. Charles stood near the department entrance, making sure everyone saw him in control, asserting his authority over the space I had built. As security walked me toward the elevator, my former deputy, Sean Fletcher, stepped close enough to whisper under his breath. Justin removed the change freeze. My hand tightened around the cardboard box. The change freeze was the only thing preventing engineers from making unapproved changes before midnight. Without it, they could disable the backup link, push incomplete routing rules, or alter the migration order. The elevator doors opened. I turned toward Sean. Document every instruction you receive. Charles heard me. Matthew, he called out, stop trying to manage people on your way out. I said nothing. The doors closed, cutting off the view of the company I had protected for 15 years. In the elevator mirror, I looked calm. Inside, I was doing the math. It was 2:47 in the afternoon. The migration started at midnight, and if Justin had already removed the freeze, Ironwood had just over 9 hours before one bad decision could take the entire portfolio offline. I walked out of the building into the humid afternoon air. The weight of 15 years of service felt like a physical burden on my shoulders. I had started at Ironwood when the company was just a small office with leaky ceilings and a handful of servers. I had put my life into this place, believing that dedication would be rewarded. Instead, I was leaving with a cardboard box and a piece of paper. I placed the box in the passenger seat of my car and sat there for a long time, looking up at the glass windows of the 4th floor. I knew the vulnerabilities of the system better than anyone. I knew that without a staged transition, the entire network would collapse under its own weight. But I was no longer the director. I was just an outsider. I did not start at Ironwood as an executive. 15 years earlier, I walked into that same building as a service delivery manager with a second-hand laptop bag, a stack of certifications, and the stubborn belief that good work would eventually speak for itself. Back then, Ironwood managed 9 regional accounts. The company was ambitious, understaffed, and always one missed deadline away from losing a client. I was hired to organize service reports and coordinate vendors. Within 3 months, I was handling escalations that senior managers avoided because I stayed calm when everyone else started blaming one another. I liked solving difficult problems. More than that, I liked being trusted. The first time a client called me directly at 2 in the morning, I felt proud. The 10th time, I told myself it was part of building a career. By the 100th time, being available had become my identity. I answered calls during family dinners, school events, and doctor appointments. One Christmas Eve, a cooling failure shut down part of a client data center. I spent 7 hours coordinating engineers and backup services from my kitchen table, while my daughter Chloe sat beside an unopened gift. She was 12 years old. At midnight, she asked if I was finished saving work yet. I told her I would be done soon. I was not. Years later, when my mother had surgery, I took a client escalation from the hospital corridor because Ironwood had never approved the backup position I had requested. I remember watching nurses wheel my mother away while Charles messaged me that he needed me focused and that this account was worth $12 million. I stayed focused. That was what I always did. The portfolio grew from 9 regional accounts to 38 major clients. We supported more than 55 warehouses, hundreds of retail sites, financial processing systems, and healthcare supply operations. Revenue climbed past $120 million, and client renewals rose because I knew which promises we could keep and which risks needed immediate attention. But every time I became eligible for promotion, the explanation changed. One year I was too important to daily operations. The next year I needed more executive presence. Then Charles said I was not commercial enough, even though clients regularly asked for me during contract renewals. My work kept moving upward without my name attached to it. Charles presented my recovery plans to the board. He repeated my client strategies in meetings I was not invited to attend. When a major retailer renewed a 7-year contract after I stabilized its network, Charles accepted the praise and called it a leadership win. I received a thank you email and another weekend on call. I knew it was unfair. I also knew why I stayed. My divorce had left me carrying most of the household expenses. Chloe was preparing for college and my mother, Helen Sinclair, needed ongoing care. Ironwood's salary paid the tuition deposits, medical bills, mortgage, and everything in between. Walking away without another job would not have been brave. It would have put 2 people I loved at risk. Charles understood that. Whenever I challenged him, he reminded me how difficult the market could be. At your level, he once said, companies usually want someone younger and less expensive. He said it gently, as if he were giving useful advice. So, I worked harder. I trained my team. I created runbooks. I documented every recovery process and built backups for nearly everyone except myself, because Charles never approved enough staff to replace what I handled. That was my mistake. I thought being necessary made me safe. In reality, it made me useful to people who believed I would never leave. Then Ironwood's board began discussing an acquisition. Suddenly, Charles wanted every account, every success, and every leadership decision tied directly to his name. My experience complicated the story he wanted to sell. He needed the portfolio to look simple. He needed Justin to look capable. And most of all, he needed me gone before anyone asked who had actually built the system holding those $120 million accounts together. What Charles never understood was that the portfolio only looked effortless because I had spent 15 years designing protection behind every visible result. Every single warehouse, every scanning terminal, and every database connection was a brick I had laid myself. When we migrated our first retail network, Charles was on vacation in Hawaii, yet he signed the final report as the architect. I did not complain because I believed that results mattered more than credit. That was a foolish assumption. In this industry, if you do not shout about your work, others will steal the sound of it and pretend it is theirs. I watched junior engineers get promoted ahead of me because they spent their afternoons laughing at Charles's jokes, while I spent mine resolving network routing loops. I told myself that my security lay in my competence. I believed that if I was the only one who could fix the platform at 3 in the morning, they could never afford to let me go. But corporate decision makers do not always think about stability. They think about the quarterly review, the upcoming audit, and how to present a clean package to potential buyers. My presence was a reminder that the system was complex, and Charles wanted a simple story. He wanted the board to believe that the platform was self-sustaining, a money machine that his son could operate with a few clicks on a dashboard. By removing me, he hoped to prove that the operations director was a redundant cost. He thought he was cutting fat, but he was cutting the spine. The protection behind Ironwood's portfolio was not one program, one password, or one document. It was a web of systems that had grown over 15 years, and I was the person who understood how the pieces affected one another. On paper, Charles liked to describe the portfolio as 38 client accounts managed through one central cloud platform. That sounded clean in board meetings. It looked efficient on acquisition slides. The reality was much less simple. More than 55 warehouses depended on those accounts. Hundreds of retail locations used the same identity service to sign employees into inventory, payment, and customer systems. Supplier portals, dispatch terminals, call centers, and financial tools all passed through shared network routes. One failure could travel across several clients before the monitoring team even understood where it began. That was why I built the dependency map. It showed which client relied on which certificate, carrier, vendor, database, cloud service, and backup connection. It also showed the order in which systems had to be restored. A warehouse could appear healthy while its dispatch process was already failing. A payment platform could come online before the identity layer was stable and lock out thousands of users. Charles saw colored boxes and arrows. I saw consequences over the years. I also built an emergency network of people: vendor engineers, telecom managers, security specialists, and client operations directors knew my name. They answered my calls at 2 in the morning because I never wasted their time, hid a mistake, or blamed them for problems Ironwood created. Trust was not listed as an asset on Charles's spreadsheets, but it had saved the company millions of dollars. The migration scheduled for the night I was fired involved Ironwood's shared identity and routing layer. It was supposed to move several major clients onto a newer environment with lower operating costs. I supported the upgrade. I did not support the way Charles wanted it done. 3 older systems could not accept the new authentication chain. Their certificates had to be renewed manually before the main switch. If the migration moved first, those systems would reject employee and machine login. Warehouse scanners would stop syncing. Supplier portals would lose access. Automated jobs would fail silently before the dashboards caught up. I documented all of it. My plan was simple: renew the 3 certificates, move one low-risk client first, validate the traffic, keep the backup route active, and then continue in stages. Charles wanted everything moved in one night. The acquisition review was scheduled for the following week, and he wanted to show the buyers that Ironwood had reduced infrastructure costs ahead of schedule. Keeping the backup route active for another month would weaken that claim. Justin agreed with him. He called my stage plan old-school caution and said modern automation made manual validation unnecessary. He had never watched automation repeat a bad instruction across hundreds of locations. What neither of them understood was that my value was not hidden information. I had written complete runbooks. I maintained risk registers, vendor notices, incident records, meeting notes, and recovery steps. My team could find every document, but documents do not make decisions. During a crisis, someone has to know which alert matters, which vendor must be called first, which system can stay offline for 20 minutes, and which client contract requires notice within 15. That judgment came from years of seeing how small failures spread. There was one more detail Charles had ignored. Apex Logistics, our largest client, had added a key person service clause after I saved its national warehouse network during a previous outage. The clause required Ironwood to notify Timothy Cole if I left the account before an approved replacement completed the transition. Removing me without that process gave Apex Logistics the right to freeze new work and review the entire agreement. Charles had taken my name off the portfolio, but he had never checked how deeply that name was written into the business, its contracts, and the trust holding its largest accounts together. I had spent years cultivating relationships with client technical teams, earning their respect by being honest when we had outages. They knew that if I was on the bridge, the truth would be told, and the resolution would be swift. Charles believed that clients were just logos on a screen, contracts that could be passed around like commodity invoices. He did not realize that Timothy Cole had my direct mobile number written in his notebook under emergency contacts. The trust between Apex Logistics and Ironwood was not built on corporate branding. It was built on 15 years of midnight phone calls, rapid escalations, and absolute transparency. When Charles decided to push the transition, without the required 30-day transition period, he was not just replacing an employee. He was violating a material term of our largest contract. He was stepping onto a landmine he did not even know was there, all to save a sliver of infrastructure budget before the board met. 3 days before my termination, I stood at the front of the conference room with the risk report. Charles and Justin sat together, flanked by technical leads. I walked them through the legacy certificate failures and contract notice deadlines. My recommendation is a 10-day delay, I said. We must renew the certificates first. Charles did not wait for me to finish. There it is again, he said. The reason only Matthew can save us. Every time we modernize, you find another dependency. I had spent 15 years protecting clients. He turned that work into evidence of obstruction. Justin opened a dashboard showing real-time health checks, claiming rollback would trigger automatically. I pointed out that rollback depended on the backup route remaining active. Charles closed my presentation and ordered the migration to proceed anyway. After the meeting, I sent a formal risk acceptance notice. Charles replied 18 minutes later. Your role is execution, not obstruction. Justin Vance owns the portfolio now. Stop manufacturing dependency around yourself. He copied the chief executive and tech leads. The next morning, we joined a call with Timothy Cole of Apex Logistics. Timothy asked about my continuity framework. Charles interrupted immediately, claiming Justin developed it, then removed my screen-sharing access and had Justin present my slides. That evening, I reviewed my employment contract from my personal records. I preserved my performance reviews, warning emails, and termination notice, taking no client data. The next morning, Sarah Jenkins called me in, and by 2:40, my access was disabled. Outside, I read Charles's email again. He had meant it to humiliate me. Instead, he had created written proof that they knew the risks. The security guard escorted me out. I sat in my car, realizing I had spent 15 years protecting a company that discarded me in minutes. I called Laura Mercer, an employment attorney, who advised me to stay disconnected. Then I called Julian Pierce at Summit Tech Solutions, who scheduled an interview for 9 the next morning. I drove home, resolved to let Ironwood face its own choices. Chloe found me at the kitchen table with my termination letter. I told her I lost my job, but promised we would be okay. I left my phone on the counter. As midnight approached, the clock ticked. At 12:18, Sean Fletcher texted that Justin had shut down the backup route. At 2:20, another message arrived. The legacy systems had rejected the certificates, and authentication alerts were spreading. By 2:35, my phone was ringing with missed calls from Charles. I stared at the screen of my phone as it flashed with Charles's name. Each ring felt like a distant echo of a conflict I had already left behind. I did not pick up. I knew exactly what he was experiencing in the war room. The dashboard that Justin was so proud of would be flooded with red alerts, and the automated rollback would be hanging in a loop, unable to reach the databases, because the backup network path had been severed. My daughter Chloe came into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Is everything okay, Dad?" she asked. Looking at the vibrating phone, I turned it face down on the table. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "It is just work. Go back to sleep." She nodded and went back to her room, trusting me. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, the only sound being the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about the 15 years I had given to that company, the missed birthdays, the cold dinners, and the constant stress. Now the system was burning, and for the first time, I did not have to put out the fire. I felt a strange sense of peace, mixed with a lingering anger. The attorney had been very clear. I had no legal authority to intervene, and doing so without a contract would expose me to immense liability. I was an ex-employee, and my access had been revoked. The systems belonged to Ironwood, and the responsibility was entirely on Charles's shoulders. At 3 in the morning, a text from Sean arrived. The cloud infrastructure team is in complete panic, it read. Justin is trying to force a routing override, but it is causing a broadcast storm. The whole network is looping. I did not reply. I had warned them about this exact scenario in the risk notice 3 days ago. I had told them that without manual validation of the legacy systems, a broadcast storm would take down the payment gateways. Charles had called it a manufactured dependency. Now it was a reality. The neon clock on the wall read 3:24, its green light casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. I took a slow breath, realizing that my life had finally stopped depending on their server status. I closed my eyes and waited for the morning, knowing that my meeting with Julian Pierce at Summit Tech Solutions was only 6 hours away. I ignored Charles's calls. The legacy systems were rejecting the new certificates, exactly as I had predicted. The disaster was spreading. Warehouse scanners stopped syncing, dispatch terminals locked operators out, and supplier portals showed errors. By 2:55, Sean texted that Justin's attempted rollback had failed because the backup route was shut down. Justin then pushed conflicting routing rules, worsening the collapse. By 3:15, vendors refused verbal instructions, requiring incident tickets and named commanders. HR manager Sarah Jenkins called me, pleading for help. Charles's control finally cracked. She is withholding operational knowledge, he said. We should be talking to our legal team instead of paying the professional invoice for those services. I opened the email I had saved. I had no authority. Timothy Cole of Apex Logistics left a voicemail. His team discovered I had been fired before a critical migration affecting their network, violating the key person clause. Apex froze their contract expansion. During the emergency call, Charles tried to blame me, but Sean Fletcher had dug into the logs. He discovered that Charles had forged my digital signature on the change authorization form to bypass the system change freeze. In California, forgery is a criminal offense under California Penal Code Section 447, or rather, California Penal Code Section 470. Rendering the approval void ab initio, Sean presented this forgery proof to the board. By 4, warehouse gridlock was costing thousands of dollars a minute. At 5:26, the potential buyer postponed the acquisition. At 6:03, the chief executive formally emailed me, asking for emergency consulting terms. Timothy Cole also called, offering to discuss moving their contract. I declined to pitch him, respecting client boundaries. Reinstatement was offered by the chief executive, which Charles demanded I take. I refused. My attorney Laura Mercer sent our consulting terms: an 8-hour limit, advance payment, indemnity, and written authority. Ironwood accepted. From my kitchen table, I directed the recovery. We renewed the certificates, rebuilt the backup route, and separated the conflicting routing rules. Systems returned by noon. During the board review, Sean presented my risk notices and the forgery evidence. Charles was removed and Justin demoted. 10 minutes later, Julian Pierce called from Summit Tech Solutions, offering me a managing partner role with a higher salary and genuine authority. Apex Logistics subsequently awarded Summit their contract, citing my integrity. Together with 2 former team members I hired, we built resilient operations where no single engineer carried the burden alone. That evening, Chloe and I had dinner and my phone remained silent. I realized loyalty without respect is just permission to be exploited. Ironwood took my office, but they could not take my judgment. I was finally free. The transition to Summit Tech Solutions was smoother than I could have imagined. Within a month, we had established a new operations framework that prioritized safety over speed. When Timothy Cole signed the contract with Summit, he told me that he had done so because he wanted to work with people who respected engineering limits. I did not have to explain my choices to managers who only cared about slides. I had the power to veto changes that did not meet our verification standards. The 2 engineers I hired from my old team who had been blamed for Justin's mistakes were now leading our reliability group, earning the salary they deserved. Charles Vance tried to contest his removal, but the documentation of the forged signature was undeniable. The board had no choice but to terminate his contract for cause, stripping him of his stock options and severance. He was left with the legal consequences of his choices, while Justin was moved to a compliance role where he could do no operational damage. Laura Mercer also ensured that the company signed a mutual, non-disclosure agreement, protecting my professional reputation from any future claims Charles Vance might attempt to fabricate. We had built an ironclad defense, ensuring that any public statements about the incident would have to be approved by my legal counsel first. This was a crucial step, preventing the corporate communication department from turning me into a scapegoat for their own management failure. By the time the contract was finalized, the CEO was ready to sign any document to ensure the system recovery was completed. One evening, Chloe and I were sitting on the deck watching the sunset. She looked at me and remarked that I looked different. I asked her what she meant. "You are present," she said. "You are not thinking about a server outage." I laughed, but I knew she was right. For 15 years, I had defined myself by how much crisis I could resolve, believing that my sacrifice made me valuable. But the real value was in my judgment, and that judgment belonged to me, not to the company that had discarded me. I had reclaimed my time, my family, and my respect.